The man tumbled onto the path and was unable to rise because Victor Vance, standing 4 feet away, was holding the prosthetic support of a double amputee Army veteran and had not yet comprehended what he was holding. What Victor Vance did not realize was that a park employee named Norah S. had observed this man daily for 2.5 years. She was already moving towards them when he pushed, and the footage on 3 separate phones was already uploading before the man had even fallen. Before we proceed, from which city or country are you observing this? Please share it in the comments. We at JPTV enjoy seeing where our viewers are tuning in from. If you believe that a man who sacrificed his legs for this nation should be able to traverse a public park without being shoved to the ground by someone who has served as a police officer for less than a year, then please press the like button and subscribe. We tell stories that powerfully illustrate what respect truly signifies and what happens when it is denied to those who have most deserved it. Raymond Ford, who was 54 years old, had been traversing the central path of Sutter Falls Community Park every weekday afternoon for the preceding 2.5 years. This was not solely on his doctor's recommendation, though his doctor had advised it. Rather, the walk held a profound personal significance for him, something difficult to articulate and which he had long since ceased attempting to explain to those who had not earned such a revelation. He had dedicated considerable time to relearning how to navigate the world. The daily walk served as his tangible proof of accomplishment. It demonstrated that his relearning efforts had been successful and that his current self was capable of the same everyday actions that his former self had once taken entirely for granted. He had enlisted in the United States Army at the age of 19. In the same summer, he graduated from Harlow County High School on Fenwick Road. This decision was driven by a blend of family precedent and a personal conviction that had been ingrained in him since his adolescence. His father had served and his uncle had served. The concept of service was as integral to his upbringing in the house on Caldwell Street as furniture was, present, foundational, and largely unremarked upon because it was simply part of the household structure. He completed his basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, serving 2 tours between 2007 and 2010. The initial tour was arduous in the ways that all such deployments are. The second was markedly different. On the 14th of March, 2009, during a patrol outside Kandahar province, the vehicle Raymond was traveling in struck an improvised explosive device. He had no recollection of the explosion itself. The first sensation he recalled after that morning was a ceiling he didn't recognize, accompanied by a pain that preceded his full return to consciousness, which served as its own unique lesson about the intricate connection between the physical body and the mind. He had lost both of his legs below the knee. He spent 14 months in rehabilitation at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, where he learned to walk with prosthetic limbs, exhibiting a level of patience and discipline that his rehabilitation team would later document as among the most steadfast they had encountered in their collective professional experience. He was honorably discharged and awarded the Purple Heart. He returned home to Sutter Falls and dedicated the subsequent years to discovering his identity in the life that unfolded after the one he had originally envisioned. He was now retired, residing in a modest home on Renwick Lane, a mere 3 blocks from the park. His days were structured by the routine of a man who deeply understood the value of regularity, having experienced firsthand the void left by its absence. He would rise early. Most mornings he ate the same breakfast. He would read the news on his tablet at the kitchen table and allow himself a single cup of coffee before embarking on his walk. The walk itself followed an unchanging route, entering through the Crestfield Avenue gate, proceeding along the central path, passing the fountain, encircling the east loop towards the maintenance building, and then exiting via the same gate he had entered. This journey typically took 40 minutes on a good day and 50 on a more challenging one. He carried a dark wooden walking stick, custom fitted to his height and grip by a specialist at the Sutter Falls Veterans Affairs office on Langton Street. He used it not as a crutch, but as a critical point of balance, providing a third point of contact with the ground that his prosthetics occasionally required on uneven terrain or during moments of diverted concentration. He was 30 minutes into his walk on a Wednesday afternoon in late October when Victor Vance noticed him from the park's northern entrance. Vance, who was 26 years old, had joined the Sutter Falls Police Department 11 months prior after completing his training at the County Law Enforcement Academy on Industrial Parkway. He was assigned to the Community Patrol rotation, which covered the park and surrounding residential areas during the afternoon hours. By any objective standard, he was not an experienced officer. He had 11 months of service, the academy training, and whatever instincts he brought with him, coupled with the habits that those 11 months had begun to instill. On this particular Wednesday afternoon, these instincts and habits coalesced to form a conclusion that he reached before he had covered even half the distance between himself and the man on the central path. He observed a black man moving at a slow pace. He noticed a stick. He perceived the deliberate, careful gait of someone navigating the path with more attentiveness than most individuals exhibited. Somewhere between observation and approach, he decided that what he was witnessing warranted an investigation. He intercepted Raymond at the midpoint of the central path, approximately 40 meters from the fountain, and fell into step beside him without any initial greeting. "Excuse me," he stated. "May I inquire as to your activity in the park today?" Raymond looked at him. He had encountered similar inquiries before, in parks, on streets, and in various public settings, where his presence had prompted someone to deem it necessary for explanation. Over the years, he had developed a response that was neither warm nor hostile, but simply direct. "Walking," he replied. Vance nodded slowly. "You live nearby, 3 blocks away," Raymond stated. He did not cease walking. Vance maintained his pace alongside him. "Mind if I inquire about the stick?" Vance asked. Raymond glanced at the stick in his right hand, then back at Vance. "It's a walking stick," he said. "It appears quite substantial," Vance commented. "It looks like it could inflict some damage." Raymond stopped walking. He turned and looked at the officer beside him with the full, measured attention of someone who had just heard something so divorced from reason that a moment was needed to confirm its accuracy. "It's a walking aid," he explained. "I use it for walking. That is its purpose." Vance informed him that, in his judgment, the stick constituted a potential weapon and that he would require Raymond to hand it over while he conducted a brief examination. Raymond told him he would not be relinquishing it because it was a walking aid essential for his mobility and that there was no legal justification for the request. Vance stated that Raymond's slow gait and demeanor had appeared suspicious upon observation and that the stick further amplified his concern. Raymond specifically asked Vance what aspect of his demeanor had appeared suspicious. Vance replied that Raymond had been moving in a manner that attracted attention. Raymond explained that his mode of movement was due to his prosthetic legs and that the stick was integral to his balance on uneven surfaces. Vance regarded him for a moment. Then he reiterated that he still needed to see the stick. Raymond responded with a clear and calm no. He stated it unequivocally and without any trace of agitation, then turned and resumed his walk. He had provided the officer with a complete explanation, and the officer had chosen not to acknowledge it. Raymond Ford had not endured 14 months of rehabilitation and 2.5 years of daily routes through this park to stand on a path and engage in an argument with a police officer who had served for less than a year regarding whether his walking aid was a weapon. Vance reached out and grasped the stick, not gently and not in the manner of someone attempting to inspect an object. He seized it with the forceful intent of someone who had decided they were entitled to take it, employing both hands and a pull designed to dislodge it from Raymond's grasp, irrespective of Raymond's grip. Raymond held on for a moment instinctively, much like a person clings to the object that provides their stability. Then the stick was gone, Vance possessed it, and Raymond was left with nothing. The path was uneven, where tree roots had raised the edges of the paving stones. Raymond Ford pitched backward and struck the ground. He made no sound upon falling. He lay on the central path of Sutter Falls Community Park on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, both prosthetic legs on the ground, his walking stick 4 feet away in the hand of an 11-month officer who was looking down at him with an expression that had not yet registered the full impact of his actions. 30 meters away, near the entrance to the park maintenance building on the east side of the path, Norah's son had already ceased her task and was moving towards them. Norah's son had been employed at Sutter Falls Community Park for 6 years as a park maintenance attendant. During her tenure, she had developed a particular familiarity with the park's regular visitors, a connection born not from formal introductions but from simple, consistent observation. The same faces, the same routes, the same times of day, month after month, year after year, until the park and its inhabitants became a single, continuous entity, known to her as intimately as her own neighborhood. Raymond Ford had been a part of this tableau for 2.5 years. She knew which gate he used for entry. She was familiar with his route. She observed that he moved slowly and with care, and that his walking stick was never merely decorative. It had always served a purpose. She knew all of this, just as she knew everything else about the park, not because anyone had informed her, but because she had been diligently paying attention. She covered the 30 meters between the maintenance building and the central path at a pace as swift as she could manage without breaking into a run. Upon arrival, she found Raymond on the ground, with Victor Vance standing over him, the walking stick still in his hand. She looked at Raymond, then at the stick, then at Vance. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried the distinct authority of someone who would not be diverted or dismissed. "What happened?" she inquired. Vance informed her that he was conducting a lawful stop and that she needed to step away from the scene. Norah looked at him and did not retreat. She glanced at Raymond on the ground and asked, "Are you injured?" Raymond assured her he didn't believe anything was broken. She turned her gaze back to Vance and stated, "This man comes to this park every single day. I've known him for 2.5 years. He's a veteran. Those are prosthetic legs. That stick is how he walks." Vance again instructed her to step back. She replied that she worked in the park and was not leaving. By this point, 2 other individuals who had been on the central path had paused their activities and were observing the scene, while a third person was on their phone, presumably contacting either the police or utilizing a camera application. In either scenario, Vance now had an audience that was not dispersing. Raymond spoke from his position on the ground. His voice was even and unhurried, characteristic of a man who had determined that the most constructive course of action in that moment was to be as clear as possible. He informed Vance that he required his walking stick back in order to stand, and that without it, he could not rise from the ground under his own power. He stated this simply, without any trace of anger, which made his words more impactful than anger itself would have been. Vance looked at the stick in his hand. A subtle shift occurred in his expression, but it was neither significant enough nor timely enough to be interpreted as understanding. He told Raymond that he would return the stick once he had concluded his assessment of the situation. Raymond inquired what assessment remained outstanding. Vance did not address this question. Norah knelt beside Raymond on the path. She assured him that she would remain with him. Then she looked up at Vance and said, in the same steady tone she had maintained since her arrival, "He cannot get up without that stick. You need to give it back to him right now." Vance informed her that the stick was currently being held as a potential item of interest pending his evaluation. Norah regarded him for a prolonged moment and then stated, "It is a walking aid for a man with no legs. That is all it is. Return it." The small gathering of onlookers had grown to 6 individuals by now, none of whom were departing. 3 phones were raised. Vance looked at the phones, then at Norah, then at Raymond on the ground. For the first time since he had seized the stick, he appeared as a man beginning to grasp that the situation he was immersed in was not the one he had initially envisioned creating. He had not yet returned the stick, but he had stopped holding it with the intention of keeping it, which was at least a nascent step towards resolution. Norah stood up from beside Raymond and looked at Vance with the particular stillness of a woman who had exhausted her patience but had no intention of losing her composure, recognizing that composure in that moment was more valuable than anything else she possessed. She had worked in this park for 6 years. She had witnessed various incidents unfold on these paths, disputes, accidents, moments of ordinary human hardship, and she had learned that the manner in which one conducts oneself during such moments profoundly influences their resolution. She extended her hand towards Vance, palm open, fingers flat, and uttered a single word. Give. Vance looked at the extended hand. He looked at the stick. He observed the cluster of people who had congregated around them on the central path. 6, perhaps 7 individuals now, with 3 phones held aloft and no one moving away. The confidence that had sustained him through the preceding minutes began to show its initial signs of faltering. This was not because he had decided he was in error, but because the cumulative weight of everyone witnessing his mistake had finally become palpable. He looked at Raymond on the ground. Raymond was sitting upright on the path, his prosthetic legs extended before him, his hands resting flat on the paving stones beside him, steadying himself with the quiet, practiced composure of a man who had spent 14 months in rehabilitation, learning to inhabit a body that the world had not yet fully adapted to accommodate. He was no longer asking for the stick. He had already made his request. He was simply waiting in the manner of a person who has articulated all that needs to be said, and the only remaining variable is whether the recipient of his words will act appropriately. Vance walked the 4 feet separating him from Raymond and extended the stick towards him. Raymond accepted it without uttering a word. He positioned it on the ground beside him, placed his weight against it, and pushed himself first to a seated position, and then, with the slow and deliberate effort of someone who had performed this action thousands of times in more challenging circumstances than a park path on a Wednesday afternoon, he returned to his feet. He stood to his full height, straightened his jacket, and looked at Victor Vance with an expression devoid of heat, performance, or forgiveness. It was a clear, cold, unhurried assessment of a man who had been weighed in the past 30 minutes and had fallen short in every meaningful category. She stepped forward. She was not a large woman, nor was she vociferous, but she possessed a presence characteristic of individuals who are unequivocally aware of their stance and have no inclination to be swayed. She informed Vance that she required his name and badge number. "You gave them." She repeated them back to confirm accuracy. Then, she stated in the same measured tone she had employed since her arrival on the scene, "This man's name is Raymond Ford. He is a United States Army veteran. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan and lost both of his legs to an IED in Kandahar province in 2009. He has been walking the central path of this park every weekday afternoon for 2.5 years, and during that time, he has never given anyone who works here or visits here any reason to look at him twice. I know him. Every person who works in this park knows him, and what you just did to him has been recorded by at least 3 people standing on this path right now." Vance remained silent. There was nothing available to him that could have improved his standing, and he seemed to have, however reluctantly, reached the conclusion that further speech would only exacerbate his position. Raymond reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and withdrew 2 documents he carried with him daily, not because he believed he was obligated to, nor because the law compelled him to produce them to a rookie officer on a public path in a park he had frequented for 2.5 years, but because he was a man who had lived long enough in his body and in this country to understand that preparation was not synonymous with surrender, and that having the truth documented and accessible was sometimes the sole barrier between a bad situation and a worse one. The first document was his Veterans Affairs Identification Card, issued by the Sutter Falls 5A office on Langton Street, clearly displaying his photograph, name, and service status on the front. The second was a copy of his military discharge papers, which listed his unit, deployment dates, the nature of his injuries, and his decorations. The Purple Heart was listed third from the top. He held both documents out towards Vance without speaking. Vance took them. He examined the VA card first, then unfolded the discharge papers and read through them slowly, his eyes scanning the page in the silence of a man absorbing information that dismantled every premise he had arrived at the park with. He read to the very end. When he looked up, his face did not display remorse, as remorse would have necessitated a genuine comprehension of his actions, which he had not yet achieved. What his face conveyed instead was the distinctive blankness of a man whose foundation had been removed and who had not yet identified any solid ground upon which to stand. Raymond took the documents back. He folded the discharge papers carefully, returned both items to his breast pocket, and then looked at Vance one final time. His voice, when he spoke, was the same one he had used since the outset of this encounter. Quiet, steady, and entirely devoid of the anger that the situation had more than warranted. He said, "I gave my legs for this country. I traversed this route daily because I dedicated 14 months to relearning how to walk, and I refused to abandon this practice simply because someone with only 11 months on the job perceived my walking stick as a threat." He paused briefly, allowing his words to resonate. "You forcefully knocked me to the ground. I expect you to contemplate that for the remainder of your professional tenure, irrespective of its duration." He then turned and resumed his journey, his pace unhurried and deliberate. It was the same measured gait that Victor Vance had observed from the park's northern entrance 40 minutes prior, deeming it worthy of investigation. Norah observed him depart and then refocused on Vance, who stood in the park surrounded by 6 individuals, 3 phones still recording, and utterly devoid of further remarks. The footage appeared online before Raymond even reached the Crestfield Avenue exit. The woman who had been filming from the path had uploaded it while Norah was still speaking. By the time Raymond arrived home on Renwick Lane, removed his jacket, and settled at his kitchen table, the video had already been disseminated hundreds of times. It ran for 1 minute and 43 seconds, capturing every moment from Vance's grab of the stick to Raymond standing upright and adjusting his jacket. The video documented the fall, the gathering crowd, Norah's arrival and steadfast presence, and finally, Raymond on his feet, delivering his parting words to Vance in a voice so tranquil and measured that many viewers found the stark contrast between his composure and the injustice he had suffered to be the most challenging aspect to endure. By the subsequent morning, the video had garnered over 2 million views. By the afternoon, it had permeated every significant national news outlet, consistently highlighting a singular detail across all coverage. A distinguished Army veteran who had lost both legs in Afghanistan was shoved to the ground in a public park by a novice officer who misidentified his walking stick as a weapon. This precise phrasing, in its various iterations, became the narrative because it required no supplementary explanation or interpretation, leaving no space for the conflicting viewpoints that typically accompany such incidents. The raw facts constituted the story, and those facts alone were sufficient. By the close of that initial day, the Sutter Falls Police Department issued a statement acknowledging awareness of the incident and confirming the initiation of an internal inquiry. The statement conveyed concern for the veteran involved and affirmed the department's commitment to upholding the highest standards of officer conduct. Victor Vance was not named, nor was the specific behavior depicted in the footage directly addressed. It was the kind of declaration that suggested seriousness without committing to any concrete definition of what taking something seriously actually entailed. The public's reaction made it abundantly clear that this vague assurance satisfied no one. Vance was placed on administrative leave the following morning. The department's Internal Affairs Division commenced its formal investigation that same week. The review was concluded swiftly due to the comprehensive nature of the footage and the consistent, detailed witness testimonies, including Norah's son's formal written accounts submitted to the investigating officer. These statements left no material discrepancies between the visual evidence and the experiences of those present. Norah's statement, spanning 4 pages, provided a complete account of her awareness of Raymond Ford, his established routines, her understanding of his history, and the precise sequence of events she witnessed from her departure from the maintenance building until Raymond's exit. She submitted it without hesitation. Raymond initiated legal proceedings 3 weeks after the incident. His attorney filed a lawsuit against Victor Vance personally and the Sutter Falls Police Department, citing negligent hiring, insufficient training, and a failure to adequately supervise a probationary officer. The filing was precise and meticulously documented, bolstered by the video footage, Norah's statement, the accounts of 3 additional witnesses who came forward, and Raymond's comprehensive military and medical records. These records unequivocally established the nature of his injuries and the indispensable necessity of the walking stick that Vance had labeled a weapon. The Purple Heart was mentioned in the filing, as were the 14 months of rehabilitation. Crucially, Raymond's VA records contained a specific notation confirming his walking aid as a medically necessary mobility device, duly documented, certified, and provided through the Federal Veterans Affairs System. Within the first week of its filing, the lawsuit attracted the attention of several veterans advocacy organizations. 2 submitted formal endorsements, and 1 appointed a dedicated legal observer to the case. A congressman representing a district that encompassed Sutter Falls penned a letter to the department demanding a full explanation of the incident in Vance's training record. This letter was subsequently entered into the public record. Vance was dismissed upon the conclusion of the Internal Affairs Review 4 months after the incident. The review's findings, released in a summary document made available following a public records request, cited his failure to adequately assess the situation before resorting to force, his inability to respond appropriately to information provided by both the individual and a credible witness, and his actions in confiscating a medically necessary mobility device from a disabled veteran without legal justification. The summary omitted the word racism. It was unnecessary. The findings spoke for themselves, and the public had already formed its conclusions long before the document's release. The city reached a settlement in Raymond's lawsuit 11 months after it was filed. While the terms were not publicly disclosed, his attorney confirmed they included financial compensation and a commitment from the department to implement updated training protocols for all active and incoming officers, focusing on disability awareness and the recognition of mobility aids. Raymond continued to follow his daily route, traversing the Crestfield Avenue Gate each weekday afternoon, proceeding along the Central Path, past the fountain, around the Eastern Loop, and back out again. Norah still observed him on most days. They didn't always converse. Occasionally, she would offer a nod from her workspace, and he would return it, continuing his walk. This was the intended outcome, and it had always been the sole objective. If this narrative has resonated with you, please share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. The men and women who sacrificed everything for this nation deserve to walk through a public park in peace. And the least we can do is ensure that when that peace is disrupted, their stories are not silenced. Subscribe to JPTV. We are committed to continuing to reveal the truth.